Good afternoon. Welcome to this first webinar in a series of 4, which we are hosting at Airmic to walk you through the results of our recent deep dive survey into our and headed a profession in transformation. We'll give some details of subsequent webinars at the end of this webinar. But please do make a note in your diary because there are 3 surveys to cover in addition to the main survey, which is the subject of today's webinar. So thank you very much for joining us today. Do remember that after today's webinar, you can get a copy of our survey from the Airmic website free of charge. And I do hope that you will be able to find the time to walk through in more detail and at your leisure some of the issues that we're going to be covering today. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to move forward into our presentation for today. And the first slide that I want to cover is going to talk about how we are changing. So what does our profession look like, and who are the people who have replied to the survey? We're delighted to say that we had a great response. Over 150 risk managers took the time to share their views with us. And the thing that really struck us immediately from the survey respondents was how you have changed. I think if we'd run this survey a number of years ago, there would have been a much greater domination of individuals who only manage insurance. Now, whilst insurance remains at the heart of Airmic and is incredibly important to us, our members, and our partners in our businesses that we serve. What I think is very striking in this first slide is how the profile of respondents has changed. So if you look at the figures in front of you, 34% of our respondents now tell us that they're engaged in managing insurance and risk. 17%, which is a very interesting result in terms of other professions, are also involved in managing compliance, company secretarial, internal audit, etc. And you'll see this coming out when we refer to the other metrics that are on the slide in a moment. But quite a change in profile. So risk management sort of steady at around about 22% in terms of people who purely manage risk management, don't get involved in other professional areas, including insurance. And at the heart of this too, 27% of people who still importantly manage insurance. So we've got around about 60% of our members are engaged actively in managing insurance, but there's an increasing involvement of members in additionally or specifically taking up the role of managing risk. So that's been quite a shift. And if we're looking for transformation, I think those results are a very good example of why the paper is called as it is. If you cast your eye to the other side of this slide, for the first time, we've actually also collected really good data on what qualifications the respondents have. It won't come as a surprise to you, given that we've got around 60% of people who are engaged in managing risk and insurance, that we've got a very good proportion of people with their associate of the Chartered Insurance Institute. We've got about half of the number again who are members, chartered members of the Institute of Risk Management. And as you cast your eye down there, you'll see all sorts of different qualifications and level of qualifications. A couple of things that strike me on here is how small the number of people who've got no formal qualification is. And interestingly, a growing, we think, number of people who've got legal and other qualifications. What does this tell us? What do we take away from here? So what does this tell us? Well, what it tells us, we've got a fantastic base of well-qualified people. And so what a foundation for taking forward the transformation of the future. So I think that's the key takeaway, is the change of makeup of who has replied and what they do, and how well they are qualified, which makes them very well positioned for the future. If I turn to the next slide that we'd like to share with you, and this is again a slide extracted from the survey report, we subjectively thought that risk management was becoming ever increasingly a subject on the board agenda. And I think there's a lot of research that both we at Airmic and others have published that said that's absolutely the case. I think one of the challenges that we've got, and one of the areas of transformation that we need to work through, is being seen as business enablers rather than business preventers. There is still a tendency, we find, from some of the comments that were made to us when we conducted the research, because it was completed both from questionnaires and from qualitative interviews, that people said too often we're seen as an overhead or perhaps not a business enabling function. And I think that's something we've got to work very hard with. Do we think insurance will become a more regular item on the boardroom agenda? About 40% of the respondents said yes. A fair smattering said no. And do we think the value that insurance will bring to our organisation will increase? Slightly more people will believe that it does. I guess it depends what class of cover you're talking about. And I think as we've found in recent meetings with, for example, chairmen of FTSE companies, there are two times that boards get very excited about insurance as a boardroom agenda. One is when either they or hopefully for the organisation in question, somebody in their sector, and particularly somebody they know, has suffered an incident and potentially a loss, and then a board's attention is absolutely raised. So I don't think it's only when the board of the organisation has suffered its own loss, it's also when those near and dear to them, and which board members might talk to, have also suffered. The other area, and we'll react to this in a second, where we know that an agenda item is high up, and that is in the area of directors' liabilities. It's a very personal cover. It's a cover that matters very much to people who operate either as directors or officers. And there are a lot of things that have been happening in recent years that have affected the importance of that cover and the context in which the cover is exercised. And that might be from how an organisation is dealing with Brexit, how an organisation is dealing with digital or cyber responsibilities. But no doubt the bar for the board has increased, and therefore the awareness of the importance of cover to protect directors' liabilities has also increased. And that's one of the reasons that we'll be publishing later this year a new paper on the risks associated with directors' liabilities, and in fact also liabilities associated with employment practices and pension fund trusts. So those two latter areas have not particularly been the focus of previous guides that Airmic have published, but we know in both of those areas there's a heightened interest. That new guide will also include observations about some of these additional responsibilities and some of the issues that we think developments like the FRC code, we've mentioned Brexit and cyber, bring along, which we hope will provide members with a great tool to help them again when they do get their foot into the boardroom door, which seems ever increasingly likely, that they've got something that they can be armed with to go in and be the great basis of a great conversation with the boards that they represent. If we turn now to the next slide, it wouldn't be a survey about managing risk if we didn't ask some of the challenges that we believe you face over the next few years. And this time we asked the question in the context of what's the most top of mind risk for you today, and we also challenged you to think about what's the most top of mind risk that you might be facing in 3 years' time. And we chose the 3 years very deliberately. We know from research that we've done and have shared with others that most organisations who are now under the code reporting on long-term viability of their organisations are tending towards viability statements taking an outlook of 3 years. So some organisations have picked 5 years, but the majority have settled on 3. And we thought therefore linking the outlook on risks to how organisations are reporting on viability would be a sensible thing to do. Now, when we've asked this question before, and in most recent surveys, cyber risks, which is split here between business interruption and cyber risks resulting in loss or theft of personal data, came 1 and 2, and certainly in the Airmic pre-conference survey in 2016, that was very much the case. These risks have sort of been divided a little bit this time round, and I think loss of reputation and brand value has come right back into the forefront of people's minds. Now, whether you believe that loss of reputation or brand value is a risk, or whether you should be looking at this as an asset, is a debate that we can have another webinar about at a future date. The point we want to make here is that a lot of incidents that we've seen, particularly those that have affected, for example, and been the result of a breach in data security, or have been in the press, some of the most damaging things that have happened to organisations are impacts on their reputation and or their brand. So we're not particularly surprised that we see it so prominent there at the top of this chart. What I think is quite interesting too is that the two cyber risks are divided by market developments, increased competition, what might happen post or during Brexit in terms of stagnation of markets. And cast your eye a little bit further down the chart, because interestingly, where you start to see what people are saying might keep them awake in 3 years' time, you see arising concerns about new business models which are being facilitated by new technologies like Internet of Things, robotics, artificial intelligence, and then right underneath it, the new technologies themselves and how those might impact the risk profiles of the organisations of our responders. Sitting up above there too, and I think with some degree of link here, are changes in legislation and regulation. So those three particular areas taking on greater prominence in 2 to 3 years' time. I think what we're also seeing is that as some new technologies and business models take hold, there is a tendency towards an inclination to regulate those businesses. And we can see in some of the responses we've seen that is happening. So if we can just move on to the next slide, we picked out a slide here which talks about data. Now, the heading on the previous slide was all about the complexity and interconnected nature of risks and the fact that people still think in these silos. But one of the things underpinning this is what people think about data and some of the things that we think the profession needs to develop to learn, create and analyse data more effectively. And this is an area that we've chosen to focus on because I think we all agree that the identification of the right data, the therefore analysis of the right data, and the use of that data is going to be a key differentiator in understanding complexities, interconnected risks, and helping us to think outside of silos. And I think from what we heard, particularly in the qualitative discussions with people we spoke to in the survey, was the need to move away from just gathering data for everything just because it's there. And some people mentioned that you've seen this a little bit in the development of, for example, the underwriting of cyber risks. And for those of you who might have explored the cyber insurance market a few years ago, when the insurance industry had a tendency to send you enormous application forms based around different international and American security standards, which basically asked you everything, including your date of birth and what you had for breakfast that day. What you'll now find increasingly with these same applications for cover are a couple of things. One, a huge reduction in the amount of data that's being requested, because we can see that the data being asked for is now, what do we need? And from talking to a number of insurers, maybe even the dispensing with of application forms completely, and the underwriter coming to the client and saying, well, we've looked at your knowledge from the web, we understand what we think your risks are in this area, and here's the cover we're prepared to give, and here's the price we'd like to charge you for it. There have been some radical changes, and this is just one illustration of how the insurance industry in particular is doing some great things in the use of gathering and analysing data, and therefore data analytics. And I think if we'd run this survey a couple of years ago, and indeed we wrote a paper on this subject just over a year ago about innovation, saying that we thought the insurance industry was dragging its heels, there's some real evidence coming out from this research that that situation is starting to change. However, are we the barrier to exploiting the opportunities? For example, do our risk managers understand data as well as we need to? Are we able to create, analyze, and exploit that data? And therefore, is it the industry, in the case of insurance, that was lacking a bit of innovation, or in fact, do the risk managers need to share some of that responsibility? And certainly when you look at the slide that is in front of you and where analytics are being used now and where people think they'll be in 3 years' time, there's a very limited or moderate use. It's good to see that there's a growth, however, in 3 years' time, where suddenly quite extensive use has moved from 13 and 24 at limited and moderate up to 40 in 3 years' time. So that's a pretty steep learning curve in a relatively short space of time. The good news is that risk managers know they've got to grasp these skills. The challenge is how are you going to do it? And the challenge for Airmic is what can we do to help our members understand these skills and to mature them. You'll see we didn't only want to know what people were doing and what we thought they might want to be doing, but in the same space we were saying, well, why are you not using analytics now? And whilst there are always some budgeting and funding issues, clearly difficulty in accessing the data that people need is a clear front runner. But I guess accessing the data you need is underpinned by some of the other questions of knowing what you want, or where to find it, and then what you do when you've got it. So there's some interesting challenges which I think we could repeat for all other areas of what we think the digital future is going to bring for us. What do we think about the future of insurance? The next slide really covers where we think insurance, the industry and the risk professional is going. And there's some interesting assumptions in here. Certainly, there's no doubt that insurance remains relevant to our members. But I think the message we gave out at our annual conference in Birmingham last month was that you've got to be relevant and continue to be relevant if you're going to fulfill the needs of the typical Airmic member. And I think one of the messages that came out, particularly at the conference, and was certainly used by John Hurrell in his opening words at the conference, and was certainly used again when we ran the partner panel on the Tuesday of the conference, was that insurance has got to become less transaction-based and more perhaps solutions-based. And again, if I pick on the example of cyber, only because it's quite a good illustration of what we mean, is the increasing tendency, for example, of the insurance industry now to be able to offer value-added solutions as well as products to their toolkit. And it's relevant in the Lloyd's market to see, in fact, one or two underwriters saying, well, actually, if you only want the value-added solutions and the cover that comes with them to pay for what they might cost you in terms of things like media or data breach recovery or legal advice, then we'll offer that to you as a solution as well. So there's no doubt that there's an increasing evidence of innovation applying to more than insurers finessing and improving current processes, and evidence of the insurance industry rising to the challenge of offering completely new ways of going about their business. And this is certainly something at Airmic, as we progress our research this year in Roads to Revolution, that we will be pursuing, because that's certainly one of the areas that we're looking at, and especially with our partner organisations. What truly does transformation look like? Is it a retweaking of what you do today, or is it a completely new way of doing business? And that's the acid test and the question that we'll be addressing in that piece of work. And interestingly, just so that you're aware, all the responses that people have made to this survey are being kept and used to underpin Roads to Revolution. So all the work that you put in, for those of you on this webinar who completed the survey, that knowledge is being banked and it's going to help underpin the work that we're doing on the next project. So really adding value for what we're doing. So the next slide that we took out of the report focuses on satisfaction and dissatisfaction with those who replied and their ability to manage key risks. And it's no great secret that one of the reasons we asked this question is that we want our members to help drive what our technical agenda should contain. Where do you want us to focus? Where are you least satisfied? Are areas, of course, that we need to direct our precious resources to, and your time and energy and support to. And so you can see that there are some areas where there are still quite considerable improvements to be made, and there are some where people feel that they're perfectly happy. I think the fire and explosion at 100% is a bit interesting, and maybe, sadly, subsequent to one or two events that have happened in the world since we conducted this survey, and particularly in high-rise buildings, have led us to question actually that even in areas where previously we might have been totally confident, perhaps we're a bit less confident today than we used to be. So we're saying very much that traditional risks, if you want to call them that, or physical risks, are not necessarily ones that we can confidently dust off and put on the shelf and park for some future date to be revisited again. It just wakens us up to the fact that there are always issues that come along and make us rethink about things we feel we fully understand. But when you see our technical agenda for the next 12 months evolving as we move further towards into this year and then into next, your contribution in this part of the survey is absolutely invaluable. So we will be concentrating on issues like macroeconomic developments, cyber risk will remain on our agenda, legislation and regulation, particularly the implementation and progress of initiatives like GDPR. Business interruption and supply chain is never far away from our agenda, and political risks and new technologies absolutely at the top of the list. So thank you for the feedback you've given to us on this particular question. That's going to be very, very helpful. Going back to the area of emerging technologies, just a few takeaways. And this will also drive our technical agenda, and it builds on that previous slide of people saying that they feel not terribly confident in some of the areas of emerging technologies. And this broke down a little bit more about how confident people were on certain components. I'm not saying, by the way, this is a complete list of all emerging technologies. There are others, but what we've tried to pick out are 5 big topics: cloud computing, big data, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, particularly fueled by the use of robotics, and the Internet of Things. And I think what comes out here when you see those 5 subjects together is that the high level of confidence in these subjects is only amongst the hands of a limited few. More people are feeling somewhat confident, not confident, and I would suspect by don't know, they're not really sure, but maybe people have not given that question as much time and thought as perhaps they're going to over the next year or two. But the key takeaway for us is that if people are going to be the individuals that the board look for in terms of giving further support in the board's desire to discharge their own responsibilities for the management and oversight duties for the management and reporting of risk, we've got some ground to cover in these key takeaway areas. And Airmic have listened to what you've said to us, and particularly in this space, we will be focusing on a number of technical projects, both raising the understanding of our members in these areas, but also then the application of that understanding in their jobs. So an area of particular focus for us, we've pretty much got what cyber means. What we now need to do is to understand the foundation that underpins that digital world. Now, one of the most interesting statements that's in the survey itself is this next slide. Are we a profession or are we a discipline? If it was up to me, I'd ban the word discipline, because we are undoubtedly a profession. And in fact, this survey confirms that. Look at how well qualified the people who responded are. This is a profession. However, the difference is, like every other profession, it has different strands. So, for example, if you go into the world of law or accountancy, and let's settle on law, you may be a litigator or a corporate lawyer, you may specialize in real estate, you may specialize in employment law, government affairs, technology, pharmaceuticals, etc., etc. Huge range. If you're a project manager, you may have all sorts of types of projects that you manage, but there is no one size fits all. And just in the same way that risk management can be viewed as a profession, we have different strands in our profession. So we have members who manage insurance. We have members who manage strategic risk. We have members who focus on emerging risk, or what I would call close associates of managing risk in areas like compliance and secretarial services, internal audit, and in financial areas. So is it a profession or a discipline? No, we think it's very much a profession. But of course, one of the challenges has been, well, what do you mean by a profession? And as many of you might know, one of the reasons the Chartered Insurance Institute struggled to get the status of Chartered Insurance Risk Manager through as Chartered Risk Manager was the difficulty in defining the profession. What I'm pleased to see is that there are a number of competency models, frameworks, and qualifications now emerging, which are providing that missing link between describing the profession and then giving some substantive content. So one of the things that we'll be focusing on in Airmic is saying, well, how do you plot the journey of the profession? So I'm sharing with you a work in progress, which is the Airmic professional journey. And what we're trying to plot here, and there are two slides. If we look at the top one first, this looks at areas of attainment, technical competence, business acumen, personal attributes, specialized knowledge, and where does Airmic engage. And what we're trying to fit here is a journey. If I just quickly go on to the next slide so that you can see both parts of the journey. From the ground up is the work with the university program, the fact that we've formed a strategic alliance with 6 universities. We have 30 students, for example, at our conference this year. We've had offers of internships, we've had offers of, certainly in one case, an offer of employment. But what we're trying to do is to understand what do tomorrow's risk managers need, why are universities educating their students in the curriculum that they choose, and how can we contact those universities to engage in their academic research programs and indeed share some of the knowledge and experience that our members have in helping to warm up those students to the idea that our profession is a great place to be. And from the reaction we've had from the students who came from the conference to the conference in Birmingham, that feedback has been, we never realised what a great place this could be to pursue a career. And it's really opened the eyes of those students into what the insurance and broking sector can offer, what risk management can offer, and what we as a profession can offer. And it may not be the first job that some of these students do when they leave university, but what we're trying to do is to make them aware of what their next job might be, which could well be in the world of risk manager, working for one of our member organisations. Once people come in from university, we want them to join Airmic. And so the new Airmic membership brochure is explaining to people what that means. We've got a separate membership form for university students. But generally, why should I use Airmic? And we pulled together a brochure that explains all the benefits of being an Airmic member. And as somebody said to me earlier at a conference this week, I had no idea of the fantastic benefits that Airmic could offer me for approximately half every month that I pay for my health club. That person is signing up as an Airmic member. So we need to be proud and loud about what we have to offer and to get people to understand what fantastic opportunities there are. And then moving quickly through, we've got the entry level, and this is not by age. It can be by age, but it can also be by experience. People who might come into risk management as a second or third job, or maybe straight from university. But this essentially is the fast track program, which again we've re-engineered into a much more structured program of risk and insurance academies, and reintroducing the Airmic forum, which will be running in February next year. So a much more structured program which we can now market to the people who might be eligible. And I'm not going to walk through all the other layers. You can do that at leisure when you look at the slides. But it's taking people through the intermediate, advanced and leadership phases. And what this is helping Airmic to do is to take the research that we've conducted and say, and again, a bit of a so what are you going to do with this? Well, what we're going to do with it is that we're going to take the feedback that you've given to us and the analysis that that's allowed us to do, and to make sure that the technical and learning agenda that we produce fits somewhere into this phase of learning. What I'd ask you to do is, if you get the time, to tell us what you thought about this journey. We'd be really pleased to know, because our next piece of work is plotting a curriculum that sits underneath that. And so we'll be producing, if you like, the more granular detail. This is just a journey, and the journey will be underpinned by a curriculum of what we think people might need to equipment. And that could well include, for example, under some of the specialised or business acumen columns, more learning specifically in the area of subjects appropriate for the technological age. So, just in summary, key conclusions. Risk will increasingly become a more regular item on the board agenda. We've got to get away from being seen as the heads of business prevention and as the heads of business enablement. And we do believe there is a perception that this is changing. Brilliant news in the research is that risk managers say they are up for the challenge and they relish the opportunities of the future. Risks are becoming increasingly complicated and interconnected, and there's still a tendency for us to think and act in silos. And truly, if we want to promote and deliver enterprise risk management, we can't think that way. So we've got to find ways and solutions working with you to help our members think outside of those silos, and to think and operate in a more connected or third or fourth dimensional way. And we've got to work together. I don't know how many times I've heard cyber is not a technology risk. And I did promise myself today that I wouldn't use that expression, and I've just broken the promise. But the important thing is that we need to collaborate. That risk cannot be managed in isolation. This survey is also the first time we've asked people about resilience. Have a look at what we learned from Roads to Resilience, and have a look at how people are focusing on the principles of resilience. And data, 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 and data is key. We've got to learn to create, analyse and exploit relevant data more effectively. And insurance remains important. It's not off our radar. It's still a fantastic tool, and the greater innovation that we've heard from our members in this survey and from subsequent webinars that you will hear, which expand on some of these issues, is absolutely relevant. So we're going to ask if anyone's got any questions in a moment, but just to remind you that there is a webinar series. The next one is on Thursday the 13th at 3 o'clock, presented by AXA Corporate Solutions. After that, we're running one with Chubb on the 20th of July. And last but by no means least, one with JLT on the 27th. Each of these will focus on the shorter reports that we've published at the conference and which are also available on our website. So please, please do dial in, because I think they're going to be very interesting and a lot of fun. So apologies for my cough, as it probably is where you are. It's about 30 degrees here. The Airmic boardroom has air conditioning, but it was probably built for when hot summers were 25 degrees. So sorry for the dry throat. We don't have any particular additional questions. I've been trying to track and include subjects as we've gone through the survey. There's a lot of information in the survey. Please, please do take the time to have a look. And if you want to email any views or comments or questions, you know that Airmic is always very happy and willing to listen and respond to you. So many thanks for dialing in today, and we look forward to seeing you or hearing you again online at 3 o'clock next Thursday. Many thanks.